All right, we will start momentarily as the recording kicks in and the room populates. All right, well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I trust it's afternoon wherever you're listening in from. It's 2 o'clock here in Milwaukee where I am. My name is Ciancimino. I'm Director of Regional Development for National Review Institute. With me again is Kyle Smith and Kevin Williamson for our September movie club on the topic of gangster films. Before we get into that, a few housekeeping comments, both about this call as well as some other events going on. Regarding this call, if you'd like to ask a question, please use either the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and I'll facilitate asking the questions to Kyle and Kevin. We'll try to get through them all. You probably have seen our William F. Buckley Jr. Prize Dinner advertised, and I know I've seen some of the attendees here on the call. I know you've already registered, so thank you very much. If you have not, I strongly encourage you to. That's going to be on October 5th. It was slated to be in New York City, and unfortunately for obvious reasons, we're not able to do it live, but we have a very robust virtual program scheduled. It will not be a Zoom call. It will not be this. We've invested quite a bit to have it be a very nice, highly produced event. Consider it much more of a news broadcast format or a New Year's Eve format as we're going around the country and looking at various activities going on and the honorees being honored. We'd love to have you all. This is, in fact, our largest fundraiser of the year. So in addition to having a great time with NR writers, our honorees, and fellow members of the NR Nation around the country, it's going to a good cause, which is supporting NR and programming like this, like our book club, Burke to Buckley, and all of the other things that we do throughout the year. So again, October 5th, you can go to nrinstitute.org, and right when you get to that page, you'll see the big banner with information. Click on that, and you can register. When I sign off, I'll put my email address in the chat room. If you have any questions or any problem registering, feel free to send me an email, and I'll walk you through it. So let's get to the topic of the day, gangster films. Kevin Williamson is our roving correspondent, who's not roving at the moment, I don't believe. And Kyle Smith is our critic-at-large. I'm going to turn over to them. As I said earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat room box. This is one of my favorite genres. I've seen both of these movies many times. I grew up in the 90s when both of these movies came out. New Jack City, I was probably 8th grade, 9th grade when it came out. So all of my friends had the New Jack City soundtrack. All the white suburban kids were blaring it from their parents' cars. I have fond memories of it. We quoted it frequently in the halls of my high school. Heat probably came out when I was closer to a senior in high school. I've seen it a million times. I'm somewhat fascinated by Michael Mann movies, even though I don't always like them. They're so stylistic. I just enjoy them. I don't know whether these two movies are necessarily representative of the genre because it's such a vast genre going back to the golden age of cinema. But they are intriguing movies, and I'm going to turn over to Kevin to start talking through them. Kevin.
Hey, thank you. Well, we didn't want to inflict another discussion of the Godfather series and Scarface on everyone, although I imagine we'll touch on those too. But, Kyle, I wanted to ask you, did you ever watch the Zach Galifianakis show Between Two Ferns?
No, I find the guy kind of irritating. You?
Well, I think he's supposed to be irritating. I think that's kind of his thing. But there's a great episode where he interviews Matthew McConaughey. And his first question is, of all the things you can win an Oscar for, how surprised were you to get one for acting? Which I thought was a good opening question. And I was thinking about that when I was watching New Jack City, which has some pretty bad acting in it and some pretty bad writing in it. But who would have thought that of all the people in that movie at the time, that Chris Rock would end up being by far the biggest deal?
Yeah, amazing. Rock isn't too bad in it. I think Wesley Snipes is pretty bad. He was just getting started. He got better as he went along. I think a lot of actors make this mistake of trying to do too much when they're young, and they sort of learn to do less and less as they get older. Another funny thing about the movie is Mario Van Peebles is a rich kid who went to boarding school in Connecticut and graduated from the Ivy League, and he's making this hood drama as his first film. It was a big hit. I sort of vaguely, I wasn't following movies too closely because I was in the Army then. I was in Saudi Arabia when this movie came out in March of '91. I think it was the same week as the Rodney King beating footage, which I didn't see until I got back home. And we didn't have TVs over there. It's not really a radio story, so I wasn't really aware of what was happening over there. When this movie opened, it was, I think there are 5 different instances of violence around the country, 4 shootings and a stabbing at theaters showing the movie on the opening night. And it sort of kicked off the second wave of blaxploitation movies. I think at the time it was billed as a very serious inner city drama that sort of told it like it is about what it's like in the crack dealing world. But today it looks kind of campy and ridiculous, and these guys are having way too much fun. And it's also it kind of toggles between living the dream, the world is yours, kind of Scarface bling, and half the time it's like, don't do drugs, kids, this is bad, and you're hurting your own people, and it's very awkward.
Some real after school special preachiness in there. I agreed with this sort of idea that this is a presentation of what life is like in those communities, and that maybe Van Peebles wasn't exactly the right guy to do it. And I was thinking about that. I lived in the South Bronx for some time, and I saw a lot of interesting stuff and some scary stuff, but I never once saw a bunch of guys standing around a trash can with a fire in it singing a cappella music. And I kind of wish I had, that would be kind of cool if that were there. You mentioned Wesley Snipes getting to be a better actor over the years, and I agree about that. And I was actually thinking about that in the context of this movie, because there are a lot of people in this movie who became considerably better actors over the years. Wesley Snipes is one, Chris Rock is one, but also Ice-T is one. He is not great in this movie in a lot of ways, in that he sounds a little wooden at times. He sounds like he's reciting from memory. He's very charismatic. He's very cool. He's kind of at the height of his musical celebrity around then. And so he's able to carry that. But he's actually since, in the last 30 years of playing a cop or so, gotten to be pretty good at it. And 2 things about that. One is that someone was giving him some grief, I guess, on Twitter or something about, he got famous from this record called Cop Killer and this, kind of gangster persona and all that. And then he spent the rest of his life playing police officers in various kinds of entertainment. And his response to that was great. He said, it's both acting, right? And that's something I actually quite like about this movie. And also that era of, sort of gangster rap and all that, not only Ice-T, but figures like, Tupac and people like that, who in the really kind of great entrepreneurial American tradition took these racial stereotypes and drug hysteria and all that sort of stuff and repackaged it and sold, kind of middle-class white people their own racially inflected terror back to them in a really stylish and profitable way. And I'm kind of a fan of that. Tupac is an especially interesting case of this, I think, because he was a theater kid. He was like doing music theater at the High School for the Performing Arts and that sort of thing. And he played this gangster character in a movie and then just sort of stayed in that character for the rest of his life, even though it was really nothing like what he was. And Ice-T's a similar kind of guy where he's not from the sort of background that the character he plays is from. But he certainly played it convincingly enough to convince millions of Americans that that's actually who he was. It's like watching people who don't know that professional wrestling is fake. Mm-hmm. The sort of attitudes people have toward that. And I remember the outcry and the worry around the acts of violence that happened at this movie, and it happened at some other similar kinds of entertainment over the years. And I remember thinking to myself at the time that, in the United States of America, that there are 5 shootings on a Saturday night is not super surprising. Some of them may happen in movie theaters, some of them may happen in other places, but it seemed all to be kind of a piece, and it all kind of went together nicely.
Yeah, I would throw Spike Lee into that too. Spike Lee's from a very middle-class neighborhood in Brooklyn. He's not really from the hood. His dad was a jazz musician. He made one movie about that, Crooklyn, and he made a whole bunch of movies about being, do the right thing type of hood movies.
Brooklyn's my favorite of his movies, by the way, I think.
Yeah, and I've been to his apartment off Park Avenue. It's beautiful and lavish, and I'd love it if Spike Lee just said, "Oh yeah, this is all just an act, and you all are just buying what I'm selling." Fine.
What were you doing at Spike Lee's apartment?
His wife had a book party there or something back when I worked at People Magazine. I forget what it was. He wasn't there, but it's a really nice place. It wasn't on Park. It was right off Park. It was just yeah.
So other things I liked about New Jack City, I think it's not much of a plot, but it's a pretty straightforward plot, and it's pretty compact and economical. Not a lot of sidelines, not a lot of extraneous emotional entanglements, romances, and things like that. This happens, that happens, he's dead, movie's over, kind of like that. I think the music is great all the way through. Ice-T's music for it is good. The other stuff that's in there is good too. Even, like Keith Sweat, who I'm not normally a huge fan of, I think is pretty good in the context of that movie. And the scenes where there's music, like in the shots in the clubs and stuff where there's dancing and that sort of thing, I think are all kind of fun and really add to the energy of the movie. Whoever costumed Wesley Snipes for this is great. I love these. It's the 90s, but we're still in the 80s, really culturally, the asymmetrical, suits with the shiny buttons and all that kind of stuff, I think are a lot of fun. They create this sort of little world that you kind of want to be in. You don't really want to live in, the city as they identify New York in the movie, but you want to visit it maybe, kind of go through. It looks like there's some fun and interesting stuff happening there. And a bunch of people in small roles that are terrific in that too. Like, who's the guy I'm thinking of? Bill Cobb, who plays the old guy who shoots Nino Brown at the end. He's one of those little character actors who's just been in everything. Like, he was in Star Trek. He was in the Muppet movie. He's in, all sorts of stuff. I think he's got something like 300 credits or something on IMDb, but he never really became famous. But I think he's a lot of fun in that. And Vanessa Williams, who's not the Vanessa Williams everyone knows, but I think she's Vanessa Estelle Williams, who plays Keisha, the lady enforcer, who I think is kind of a fun character. Good stuff. The Scarface stuff is kind of entertaining, I think, too, where there's this little momentary, Scarface tributes all the way through, where they're kind of going, yeah, we're actually making a movie about Scarface more than we are making a movie about, life in New York City in 1990, 1991. And we will occasionally acknowledge that, including by having a particularly fraught scene happen while the movie's being projected onto the scene that we're shooting. A little, I think, maybe self-conscious commentary there. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if it created this trend or if it captures something that was actually happening in the hood, but I later MTV had the show called Cribs, which is about hip hoppers and their apartments and where they lived. And as my editor at People Magazine once put it, it's all about Scarface with these guys. They all had like Scarface decor and they all worship Scarface. I don't know if it was because of New Jack City that everyone got really into Scarface, but I think the big difference between those movies is Scarface doesn't lecture you at all, right? It's just like you're seeing everything from Tony Montana's point of view. No one's ever telling you, don't be a drug dealer, or you're harming your own people, or, poverty, unemployment. There's this sound montage at the start of New Jack City about poverty and unemployment. And of course, these kids are getting into drugs. There's nothing else for them to do. The economy has left them behind. There's none of that in Scarface. It's just pure bling entertainment. Michelle Pfeiffer, decked out penthouses.
Yeah.
What is it? The blimp that says the world is yours or something. I think that's where I get that message. Goodyear blimp outside his apartment or something. Shootouts in nightclubs where you miraculously escape completely unscathed.
We'll talk about that maybe in the context of Heat, where all these LA cops apparently went to the Imperial Stormtrooper School of Marksmanship and expend 10,000 rounds and hit not very much. You hit on something I think is actually interesting about both of these movies too, which is that there's a lot of, kind of immature male fantasy fulfillment in these movies. New Jack City is kind of the adolescent version of that, where they built a treehouse basically, right? I mean, that's what the whole Take Over the Carter is. And they've got the drawing that doesn't tell you anything about it. It's just a drawing. And we'll have guards here and lookouts here. And there'll be a secret password. And they kind of build, the ultimate treehouse for themselves. And they're building their little snow fort or whatever it is.
And when he says that, the guys are like, yeah, what a genius plan. You're going to put a shooter here, here, and here. That's great.
But we're going to put lookouts where they can see stuff. No one's ever thought of that before. That's great. Whereas Heat is more like of a middle-aged man's fantasy fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way of being kind of, in your 50s and still kind of cool and masculine and interesting. Speaking of which, I don't want to switch to that just yet, but the opening of that scene where they introduce, three characters. They introduce the De Niro character, the Val Kilmer character, and the Al Pacino character. And the De Niro guy, Neil, is out stealing an ambulance to use in the robbery, and Val Kilmer's character is out buying explosives to use in the robbery. And they switch to Pacino, and it's this cringe-inducing, sweaty sex scene where he's wearing like 3 gold chains, and that I guess at that point in his life was still sort of how he saw himself, and maybe how the public saw him. But he was, getting a little old for that sort of thing, even at that point, I think. But I think those things are all kind of tied up. There's this sense of late middle age masculinity slipping away and doing desperate things to try to kind of hold on to it. Other things about New Jack City. What else should we talk to you about that?
Yeah, the costumes are fantastic. That was like the Max moment of the blinged out kind of pop look with
three knuckle ring.
Wearing gold chains, but they're wearing gold ropes around their necks. I mean, you could tow a boat with these ropes they're wearing around their necks. And yet every 5 minutes we're getting these lectures about poverty, and it's like, wow, poverty. I was just reading Ross Dowd's column today about how liberals are invariably sort of toggle between revolutionary zeal and incrementalism, and this movie sort of captures that, right? There's a scene where someone derides Martin Luther King. It's like, what would you have us do? That Martin Luther King crapola? We're not going to do that. It's like they're rejecting incrementalism, Dr. King's dream of every generation being a little more tolerant and every generation advancing a little more. They don't want that. They just want to be kings of the world, and if they, die in a blaze of glory at age 30, that's fine. We used to have 5 years at the top of the world, and that's the deal they're making. And I think that the gangbangers who showed up at this movie were not going there to be lectured to. They're going there to have a good old time, seeing their fantasy lives projected on screen, where they got slinky girls dancing in front of Scarface, and there's drugs everywhere, and it's great, and they're just having the time of their lives. So the reason this movie was a hit, I think, is the fantasy element, not the moralizing element.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how I remember the '90s, but maybe my experience wasn't.
What on earth were you doing living in the South Bronx? Did they not pay you enough?
What's that?
Did they not pay you enough? Why are you living in the South Bronx?
Well, I lived there when I first went to work for National Review. It was a great place to live. I was like the first subway stop in the Bronx there, 138th Street, and it was actually a very quiet neighborhood. I kind of liked it. It wasn't bad at all. I had a place that was big enough you could ride a bicycle around in my living room, so that was kind of nice. Let's move on to Heat for a bit. It's a very different kind of movie, but another kind of gangster movie. As I said before, I think it's more of a middle-aged man's movie, middle-aged man's fantasies, as opposed to these kind of teenage or post-adolescent fantasies. Natalie Portman, small role but important role in that. And I think is a really, really good actress at that age already. I think she really quite nails that small but important performance. What do you think?
Yeah, even better in Beautiful Girls. Did you ever see that movie? I think it was 96.
No, I didn't see that. What's it about?
So Timothy Hutton plays this, I guess he's a New York guy, and he goes home to New England. I think it was in New Hampshire or something. There's a death in the family, and he she's like the neighbor next door. She's like 14, but she's very precocious, almost flirtatious 14. And he kind of strikes up this friendship with this girl next door. And it's all about him sort of reconnecting with his kind of high school meathead friends. And there's sort of a sense of sadness that this girl's too young for him. And she'd be perfect if only she were 5 years older or whatever. And it's a kind of a funny, heartwarming kind of movie. Mira Sorvino was in it, was very good, and Michael Rappaport has a great scene. And it's really about what happened to your high school knucklehead friends when you grew up and became slightly more mature, and it's just a sense of what life would have been like if you'd stuck with this kind of quiet New England existence. Natalie Portman is just very, very cool in that movie. I think she was in full possession of her talents already at that age. She must have been about 15 or something. But anyway, yeah. It's a movie that never really grabbed me that much. And I was trying to figure out why. I think I went to see it on opening night in 1995. And the theater was about half empty. I think I'd read the rave review in Time magazine. And I kind of walked out of it going, oh, okay, that was pretty good. I think the reason it never really worked that great for it, I'd say it's, maybe 10th best movie of 1995 or whatever. I was living in England the following year, and I discovered everyone in England thinks it's a masterpiece. And at the time, there was a big kind of movie magazine culture, and they were all raving about this movie, and it was sort of on the same plane as The Godfather. I would not put it on the same level as The Godfather or even Casino, which came out at virtually the same time. I think Casino is a great movie. I think Mann's idea was we're going to do the good guys and the bad guys, the boys and the girls. So we're going to get all 4 quadrants. But the domestic scenes, to me, just kind of lie there. None of the women characters are particularly well drawn or interesting. De Niro, Neil Macaulay, who's based on a real guy that Mann heard about in Chicago, he tells us straight out, you can't do anything in this life unless you can walk away from it in 30 seconds. Apparently, he doesn't even have any furniture, and he's got this beautiful house in Malibu with no furniture in it. He was this totally spare, Spartan existence. He's somehow managed to make it to age 48 without ever forming an attachment with any woman. And yet he meets a random cute girl in a coffee shop. He's totally anodyne, uninteresting girl who works in a bookshop, and she totally changes his life, and he's gonna start risking things because he's attached to this girl suddenly. That doesn't make any sense to me. The Ashley Judd scenes, he just comes across as like a whiny housefrau. Pacino's scenes with his wife, it's like, well, what's the problem here? And he's a little distant. He's psychologically distant because he doesn't want to talk about murdered prostitutes and stuff he saw on the job. None of these domestic scenes are very interesting. To me, if you cut all of the domestic crapola out of it, you have a really tight hour and 45-minute cat and mouse drama without a cool, you got a cool heist at the beginning and that great shootout in the middle. And, that climactic scene at the airport at the end is really good. I could totally do without all of the domestic stuff. Just doesn't add anything to the movie to me.
Yeah, I think the way the movie really feels is it's the story of these, decaying relationships with the crime spree as sort of a background more than anything else. I maybe take a little more interest in that than you do. One of the things I like about Michael Mann movies that I think a lot of people find irritating about them is that every scene in every movie is shot and scored and written and directed as though it's the most important thing that's ever happened.
Yeah. And
there's no variation in sort of tone and dynamics through his movie. Everything is exactly this intense all the time. And I think of that scene where Diane Minoras, who plays the wife, the Pacino character, does that little talk about, you don't live with me, you live among the remains of dead people, and that sort of thing. And it's like a moment from stage direction, really, where everything kind of stops and the camera just sort of turns a little bit, and she does this little, dramatic monologue that you might expect to hear at some performance at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. They do everything except put a spotlight on her and drop off the rest of the, stage into darkness. And I think that irritates some people, or that kind of operatic mentality, I think some people find difficult to really appreciate. Music in that film is a weird kind of mix of Kronos Quartet and Moby, which is a very 90s kind of mix, certainly, but I think there's maybe an element of even excessive, kind of self-seriousness, particularly to the Kronos Quartet music, which is kind of aggressively minimalistic, hold one note for 40 bars, kind of arrangement.
And the look is always Architectural Digest. I mean,
yes.
Robert wears these beautiful designer suits, and so does Pacino. Everybody just looks so great. I just can't believe a career criminal would have a house that beautiful in Malibu. And by the way,
quite nice.
that's a $10 million house. Did he pay for that in cash? I mean, talk about attracting attention to yourself as a gangster.
Well, and the girl in the bookstore has a house up in the Hollywood Hills, overlooking the city. It's pretty
Yeah, and when we meet her, she said, "Oh, my house is kind of run down." It doesn't look run down to me. And by the way, just the view alone is probably $1 million view up there. Yeah, he kind of idealizes everything in spite of himself. Man was a real detective fanboy, and he actually formed a lot of close friendships with detectives and would put them in movies. And one of those guys was Dennis Farina, former detective. He made a movie star out of him. He became a very valuable character actor. This Heat story was based on something that happened in 1964 in Chicago. A man knew this detective named Chuck Thompson, I think, and he was actually staking out this guy. His name was actually Neil McCauley, and he discovered at one point the detective's crew was tailing the guy, and somebody got up to use the restroom or something, and McCauley flinched and he walked away from a job. So man put that in this movie, similar scene, and the detective wound up killing McCauley in a shootout at a grocery store. The guy was hitting a grocery store with his crew, and McCauley had been waiting for him and took him out in an alley next to the grocery store. 3 guys got killed in this great shootout in 1964 in Chicago. So man was carrying that around with him for all those decades, and he made a TV movie about it in the late 80s, and developed that into Heat. And I think what really elevates it is Pacino. His line readings are just so great. The scenes where he's sweating the snitches and he's sort of bursting into shouts. This is at the sort of beginning of Pacino deciding that he would kind of shout every other line in a hilarious way, which he kind of took too far in the Devil's Advocate and movies like that. Somewhat became a parody of himself. But I think Pacino just adds so much to the movie, and by 95, it was obvious that De Niro had totally run out of ideas. He doesn't really do anything in this movie except he's got a scowl when he's trying to look serious. He scowls a little. And he also did nothing in Casino as far as I'm concerned, just a flat performance. So that's a great movie. The thing I love about Pacino, and I alluded to this in an essay I wrote about Pacino last November when The Irishman came out, is Pacino's not that short. I rode an elevator with him once, and he's about 5'8" or 5'7", but a lot of actors are that height. Dustin Hoffman's that height, Robin Williams is that height, Paul Newman and Robert Redford, all these guys are around 5'8". But Pacino's the only one who seems short on camera. He's got all these scenes with the other detectives, and they're all, Michael T. Williamson is one of them. They're all 6 inches taller than him. And he uses, if anything, exaggerates his smallness to kind of seem to make like a more concentrated pellet of energy in all these movies. He's, if a short guy doesn't want to look short on camera, he can work it out with the director so he never appears short. Yeah. But Pacino's willing to look small, and it kind of makes him more interesting and more threatening. He's just a little dynamo, and I just think he's one of the all-time great movie stars.
Does that guy pronounce his name Michael T. Williamson?
Michael T. Yeah, it's not McKelty, it's Michael T.
Oh, it looks like it should be McKelty. Well, I've been saying that wrong all my life. Yeah. I like him a lot in Justified, where he's Elston Limehouse. I thought he was terrific in that. That's another thing about Heat. It's got a lot of really good people in relatively small roles. Like, Ted Levine. It's nice to have him saying something other than put the lotion in the basket,
Jeremy Pivens, and there's a crooked veterinarian.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. Yeah, Jeremy
Pivens. Mobsters for lots of cash.
Got to have a doctor out there somewhere. Some of the musicians in that didn't go on to become much better actors. Like Tone Loc never really became a much better actor, I don't think. Henry Rollins kind of did. He's done some roles since then that were more interesting, and although not exactly getting ready to do Shakespeare.
Yeah, I cannot believe the size of Henry Rollins' neck in this movie. It's just, he's all neck. I don't know what exercises you can do to make your neck that big. It's unbelievable.
Neck bridges.
Yeah.
John Voight, great, sort of delightfully sleazy. Some lazy stuff in the movie too, like Danny Trejo's character's name is Trejo.
Well, Michael Mann said that was his first movie, so he just kind of threw him in there, and he didn't realize what a great character actor he would turn out to be.
Yeah, he also became a much better actor over time. Do you like him?
Yeah, sure, but I mean that final scene where De Niro tracks him down, he's like choking in his own blood, and he gives him all the information he needs before he expires. That's kind of cheesy. Yeah. Another thing I don't buy about the movie is Neil is this master of risk assessment, and yet in the first heist, he takes on this guy, Wayne Grove, who nobody knows, turns out to be a loose cannon. He winds up being responsible for 3 murders. He throws the whole thing out of whack. And they spend the rest of he winds up getting De Niro killed at the end because he has to chase him down in a revenge plot at the airport hotel. I mean, it just doesn't comport with the idea that this guy's the master criminal plots out every detail. The very first thing we see him doing is allowing this totally unknown whack job into his carefully planned heist.
Yeah, that is a little bit of a weak point in the plot. Although I do sort of like that he goes back to try to whack him at the end, because there are a lot of people who don't obviously act the way they talk. And he gives this speech several times about you have to be willing to let go of everything. And the one thing he can't let go of is just a grudge, is the desire for revenge. And that kind of feels like it really makes the character work as a kind of semi-tragic gangster figure.
Yeah, I agree. He has to go back and get him. That's got to be the weak link. But he pulls it off in a really masterful way. He comes up with this elaborate plot to get his room number by posing his room service, and he pulls the fire alarm and creates all this chaos, and he almost gets away with it. Yeah. And even in the last second, he almost gets away with it because he's hiding behind a container at the airport, and the only thing that gives him away is chance. His shadow is spotted by the detective as he's about to kill him. Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. You need some plausible way for the 2 principals to come mano a mano at the end, and that's a great reason for it.
Yeah. The scene with them in the diner is quite amusing. It's fun to watch them have this kind of pissing contest between the 2 of them,
Yeah, that always kind of let me down because we'd never seen Pacino and De Niro in a movie together. Of course, they're both in Godfather 2, but not at the same time. And I would have arranged to get them in a stage situation where we could see both of them acting off each other. Instead, they're doing a ping pong match where there's a camera over each actor's shoulder and we go back and forth. And to me, Pacino just blows away De Niro in that scene. Pacino's his voice modulations and his expressions are just way more interesting and complicated all the way through this movie. To me, all De Niro can kind of do is like, has just like frown.
You're good at it. That's good at it. In addition to Danny Trejo's character just being called Trejo, casting lines can be cruel. And the teenage girl who gets murdered, she is credited as Dead Hooker.
Yeah.
And her mother is Hooker's mother.
Yeah. So I watched the whole movie with Mann's commentary on it. And, I watched the whole documentary. It turns out it had a 20th anniversary DVD sitting around. It's now the 25th anniversary. I never get around to opening the DVD. Pacino said amusingly he and Mann worked out that his character was a cokehead, and that's why he keeps kind of having these little bursts of crazy energy. So I thought that was funny. It would have been more interesting if they had put that in the movie, though, because as it is, he's just a totally cool professional. He's the master of every crime scene. He instantly figures out everything that's going on. Almost an impossibly professional detective. He goes to that crime scene after the heists at the start, figures out every detail. He knows exactly, walks us through every little detail of it. And, we're supposed to think his home life is falling apart just because he's a little distant and reserved and he's 4 hours late to dinner sometimes. But, his daughter's going to commit suicide because of that, or attempt suicide because of that. 70% of the teens in America would be committing suicide if daddy not being there sometimes was an issue. That's just not enough. It's not, the domestic stuff is not well enough motivated.
True stuff. Should we take some questions now, Chris?
Sure, that sounds good. That's a very good overview of those movies. Let's fly through. We have a lot of questions coming in. Doug Childers asks, on New Jack City, any comment on the subplot that it looks like a takeover by the new guard from the old guard of the Italian gangsters? Any thoughts on that?
Frankie Needles trying to make the deal with G Money. Is that what we're talking about? Because I think that's sort of, he's forced into that by the police. I didn't really see that. Well, the one thing I did like about the Italian gangsters is he's uncredited, but one of the guys standing at the bar is Jake LaMotta, which they just threw him in the movie because I guess he was around and they dropped him in there, which is kind of fun. That's not something that really jumped out at me, Kyle.
Well, it's interesting. It kind of picks up on that line in The Godfather where they're talking about starting the heroin business in the 40s. And one of the crime family bosses says, oh, of course, we'll keep the trade in the dark people of colors because they're animals anyway. Let them kill each other. We won't let it near our neighborhoods. So this sort of picks up on that. It's like the next chapter in this kind of, warped American story. It's I wouldn't be too interested in a movie that kind of blamed the whole crack epidemic on outsiders, but it's a movie that kind of makes it clear there were a lot of rewards inside the game, and there'd absolutely be reasons why people would be attracted to dealing crack. I sort of don't buy the view of this one apartment building completely populated by crack zombies. It seems ridiculous that the police would know this building exists and yet not bust it until their snitch gets in trouble. I mean, if they already knew all these guys were inside there, they could have gone in there with guns blazing at any point. They're obviously willing to do that. I think I really
enterprise room.
Yeah.
But they had lookouts, Kyle.
Yeah.
And a password.
I actually recall in Casino, I think a bit too, where one of the characters tells Ray Liotta to not start trafficking in drugs because that'll go south, and then ultimately he does, which leads to his downfall. It's kind of the same type of minor subplot. Next question from our good friend John Amarati, who says he follows the development of a heist. Is the heist genre a subset of a gangster genre, or do the Venn diagrams just touch every now and then? Heist genre and gangster genre.
I don't know how to answer that. I think the heist is a subset of the gangster genre because the heist kind of presupposes there's got to be an organized group of people within it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think what really throws us off on that is just that some gangsters are more charming than others. Like, George Clooney as Danny Ocean. It's a heist movie, and they're gangsters. They're an ongoing criminal enterprise.
Right.
But they're kind of sweet and charming and funny, and they don't kill people. And so we don't really think of them as being gangsters in the Don Corleone or Nino Brown sense. But
that's because of the comedy, though. It's not.
Yeah.
Another quadrant there. Yeah.
Maybe a MacGuffin plot device too sometimes, right? Where the elements of the heist aren't that important, but just the device to introduce you to the characters and keep the plot moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course, in an Ocean's type of movie, if it came down to it, you might have to kill somebody, so it wouldn't really be practical to have this rule against killing anyone. When you kind of when you set yourself up as a comedy, the rules are nobody gets killed, I guess, or at least no undeserving person gets killed. So you sort of
Sanders in Madison, Wisconsin asks, he'd be interested to know where you think this movie fits in Pacino and De Niro's respective careers. You already referenced their coffee scene, and Pacino's overacting potentially. But as far as their respective careers, this is, I don't know, maybe mid-career for both of them. Where are they? Is this a high point, a low point? What do you think about their individual careers?
I think about the career of Anthony Hopkins often, where he spent years and years and years as a serious Shakespearean actor and did some important films and things like that. And then at a certain point in his life just said, I really want to make some money. And so he does Silence of the Lambs, and now he's in superhero movies and all this kind of stuff. And he knows they're crap. He jokes about them being crap. And but they're crap that I like Silence of the Lambs, but they're pulpy entertainments that make you a lot of money in a way that playing King Lear at the Brooklyn Academy of Music just doesn't. And I think this is the beginning of that stage, both for Pacino and De Niro, where they had already done the things that had won them the kind of artistic accolades, and they've done, Pacino especially done stage on top of the films. And this is let's just be action heroes and make movies that make us, $20 or $50 million a pop for the rest of our lives, because, you're not going to get a house in the French Riviera unless you do.
Yeah. Aging is a big part of it. I think male actors have a longer career than women, but they suffer from the same problem, which is that the roles start to dry up when you hit 50, maybe even 40. And, just as a woman is going to get lots of plastic surgery and lots of Botox and stuff like that, the boys just sort of get louder and louder. Pacino got louder and louder as his career went on, and he became more and more emphatic and kind of more ridiculous, just because he needed to keep getting people's attention and keep getting cast. And you can see that in Hunters, the Amazon show, where he plays a kind of Israeli super spy who's dedicated to I don't know if he's Israeli, Jewish, German, I guess. He's dedicated to hunting whatever surviving Nazis are left in 70s New York City. Yeah, Pacino kind of got ridiculous and went too far, but De Niro, to me, just kind of petered out, and he lost all of his energies, and was both of them are kind of taking paycheck jobs these days, and it's very rare for someone like Scorsese to come along anymore and offer them a really meaty role. Both of them in different ways, I think, lost their mojo. But Pacino, I insist, is along with Jack Nicholson, one of the two great male movie stars still with us. And he can really never do any wrong with me, even though he overdoes it in some of these movies. He started overdoing it in Scent of a Woman back in '93.
Famous.
The courtroom scene where he started shouting things out. I just love Pacino. To me, he just radiates intelligence. He's just got so much energy, even now that he's almost 80. I just love him. De Niro, I've completely lost interest in.
I like Pacino in his B-movie mode, to be honest. I like The Devil's Advocate. I think it's a very fun movie, and parts of it are actually really kind of intelligently written. Also something that kind of has a feel of stage writing to it at times, with the kind of dramatic monologues and such. I like him in movies like Any Given Sunday and things like that. I think those are actually quite a bit of fun, and a good use for his post-peak skills.
Mm-hmm.
What else we got?
Location in some of these movies. New Jack City is very, much a New York City movie. There's several Scorsese movies that are very much New York. There's The King of New York. There's Gangs of New York. Heat is just very much LA. Departed was kind of a Boston. It just seems like a lot of these gangster movies, Untouchables, I think of in Chicago, and a lot of the 1930s Jimmy Cagney type Chicago mobsters. It just seems like location is such a big part of all these movies. Any thoughts on that?
I give Michael Mann a lot of credit for making an action movie in LA that doesn't end up at some point in the LA River. Because like every movie in Los Angeles in which there's a chase scene, they end up in the LA River at some point. And, from Grease onward, the whole thing goes there. I think that Mann has a real gift for shooting Los Angeles and in other films as well. And he makes it look like a more visually interesting and rich place than it actually is, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's that movie was filmed entirely on location, and it looks amazing. But it's all this sort of God's eye view. There's a lot of scenes from either the hills or Malibu, and kind of nothing in between, which is nothing but traffic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always amused by LA movies that make it look like you can get from point A to point B in 2 minutes, as though you can get across the street in LA in 2 minutes. And
that's a good thing about his movie Collateral, which is maybe my favorite of his movies, is that it's an LA movie in which traffic is essentially the central character. And they are trying to avoid being delayed and find the most efficient ways to get hither and yon over the course of their crime spree.
There's a lot of subway scenes in that movie, right? I can't believe anyone actually takes the subway in LA except for domestic help.
Yeah, the anti-hero dies on the subway, of course, which is what you would do in Los Angeles. You would die when you got on the subway.
Right. And New Jack City has a lot of great locations too. I mean, I'm sure you remember back in the early 90s, there were all these kind of vacant lots with rubble and junk strewn in them in neighborhoods that are now, there's like $4 million townhouses on some of those properties in Harlem. And big sections of the South Bronx are still kind of burned out and nothing there. As recently as the mid 90s, before the revival really get going. Yeah, probably adds to your budget if you have to shoot on location, although I think New Jack City had a limited $6 or $8 million budget. It really adds a lot to your movie if you can shoot on location. I'll watch any movie with great New York locations. They started those in, I think, the mid '60s. They really opened it up to location shooting, and they weren't too particular about improving the script or anything. So there's a lot of great locations in Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, of course, Midnight Cowboy, Taxi Driver. I think when Scorsese made Taxi Driver, he said he wasn't setting out to make a movie about how run down New York was. It's just like, that's how New York looked. It's very incidental. It's very much in the background. But today, that's the thing that really stands out is, holy crap, I can't believe what the city looked like in 1976.
Yeah, whoever runs against de Blasio next time around should just put together clips from these films and say, do we really want to go back to this again?
Yeah.
All right, we just have time for a couple more questions. So if anybody has any, feel free to put them in the chat. Why is this genre endured? It seems like, it started strong in the golden age of cinema in the 30s. And then it seemed like there was a revival in the 70s. You listed a few movies, gangster movies from the 70s, the 90s, which both of these movies are from, and you can list another dozen from the 90s. And then even in the last few years, I think Public Enemies was another Michael Mann movie, which is maybe 10, 12 years old now. Seems like every 20 years or so, there's just this huge outpouring of new gangster films. Why is it endured?
Yeah, my guess is that it's exotic enough that it creates opportunities for real drama and sort of fantasy projection, those sorts of things. But it's familiar enough that you can still have the kind of domestic drama and other sorts of things in it that, unlike, say, fantasy or science fiction or things like that, or historical period pieces, it's not so far removed from the world that it's difficult to develop a kind of audience connection with the characters. And I think a lot of what we look for in popular entertainment is fulfillment of desires that are difficult to fulfill in a decent world. So we live in this, very peaceable, prosperous, bourgeois kind of world in which we're all, pretty well fed and pretty safe, and there aren't a lot of, physical challenges and that kind of thing. And this is how you want to live. You don't really want to live in the alternative. But it doesn't provide a lot of opportunities for, particularly a lot of, conventional, traditional male virtues like physical courage and that kind of thing. And so I think people like to watch stories that are set in a world in which those things still matter. It's not quite as neutered and spayed as ours is.
Yeah, the thing that connects us with a movie like Heat is it's sort of like an NBA crime drama. You can totally picture this, De Niro's Neil McCauley's reading a book about stress fractures in titanium. He's probably smart enough to be an MBA, and why he would go into a life of crime when you could easily get rich in management, I have no idea. That's the part that doesn't make sense to me. But we have this professional class, and we imagine that people like ourselves in very nice suits are the ones executing these incredibly dramatic moments that lead to shootouts with AR-15s in the streets of LA. That's another thing I don't get about Neil McCauley. It's master of risks, sets himself up to have a giant shootout in broad daylight. So, unlike, say, a Western, we can kind of picture the landscape. It's happening in streets that we know. It's happening with people who look like us. And, it's just people like us living a very extreme lifestyle where you can get shot in the face at any given moment. So that's where the drama comes. There's always an opportunity for shootouts and chases. And it's a way to ground that in our known world.
All right, I think final question, which is my standard question. Other movies from the genre that you particularly like, you might recommend? It's a vast genre, like I said, going back for many years. So Scorsese probably has a dozen himself. You think about some of the notable actors who have starred in so many of these movies, from Pacino and De Niro, Jimmy Cagney, Edward G. Robinson. You think about all these movies. Any ones that you particularly like aside from these two?
My favorite is probably Carlito's Way. 1993, Al Pacino. I just love Carlito's Way. The balance between the love story and the crime drama, and the way this guy kind of tries to go straight, he's getting out of prison on a technicality at the beginning and decides he's going to go straight, but he immediately gets sucked back into this world of horrible people, and his own lawyer winds up leading him on this deranged mission to Rikers Island that involves killing a mobster. It's just such a great movie. It's such a great character. Pacino's just very sympathetic. There's just a wonderful love scene with his dancer girlfriend Gail, where he kind of comes to her apartment promising her he's got cheesecake, and she knows he doesn't have cheesecake, and she won't let him in. And then finally she says, flirtatiously, "If you don't get in, you don't get in." So he has to. There's a great look on Pacino's face. It's like 55 years old at this point. He's got, oh no, I have to break into this apartment to play the Romeo. There's so much weariness, so much depth to this character. I think it's one of Pacino's greatest creations, and probably my favorite Brian De Palma movie.
Because it's a Brian De Palma movie, right? Also very stylistic. John Leguizamo, I think, is in that movie. I think that was one of his breakout performances, and he's a fantastic character.
Benny Blanco from the Bronx.
Yeah, I like Michael Mann's films in general. So I was mentioning earlier, I think Collateral is a very interesting movie. Not exactly a gangster movie, I guess, because he's not in a gang. He's just a gang of one, I suppose. But one of my favorite Tom Cruise performances, which granted is not a super long list, but a very engaging film, I think, in a lot of ways. You know, when I first saw Casino, the first time I saw it, I believe I saw it in a theater, if I'm recalling correctly, I hated it. I thought it was just dreadful. It's grown on me since then. I've also developed a little bit of, I guess, of affection for Las Vegas in the meantime. So maybe I enjoy the story a little bit more for those reasons. Although I think there's an opportunity out there for someone to really make the kind of great Vegas gangster movie, which has never really been made, that Casino sort of touches on a little bit, which is the period of, you know, Walt Disney and the corporations moving into Vegas and showing these gangsters, you know, what organized crime really looks like when you really organize it. When you organize it so well, it's not crime anymore, it just more or less acts the same way. And, you know, somewhere there's a great, you know, kind of Wall Street versus Godfather film about Las Vegas to be made, and I hope someone makes it one of these days.
All right, Kevin, Kyle, thank you so much. Thank you all of you who joined us for the call today. Like I said in the onset, I hope you will visit nrinstitute.org and register for our prize dinner coming up on October 5th. My email's in the chat if you have any questions. Otherwise, Kevin, Kyle, thank you again for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you all next month.
Thank you, everybody.